Welcome. So glad to have you with us today. We are going to be talking about what it's like to be a medium. And I say we because I have my dear friend Terri-Ann Russell on the show again. And I know you can't see her waving, but she's waving. But she is one of the mediums who works with me at Sedona Soul Sisters. And we've been friends for several years now. And I thought it would be fun. I don't want it always to be you hearing my point of view. It's fun to bring people on. And we were just chatting about how shall we approach this? And I think it's good. We're going to talk a little bit about our childhood as a medium, because let's face it, that movie, The Sixth Sense, I just watched that again recently. And that's what most people, that's their whole concept of being a medium. And it really did bring up a lot of questions for people to me about childhood. So Terri-Ann, you want to talk about your childhood with your ability as a medium?
Sure. So I didn't understand it at all, actually, what was occurring. I just thought it was like normal for everybody to see spirits, and when I started, so I was older then, but when I was younger, I felt a real connection to spirit. Like I could see them then. My clairvoyance isn't that strong now, but I can see them then. I can definitely feel their presence. It was weird. It's like I had nobody around to discuss it with. I would say something to someone and they'd be like, that's weird. So it wasn't anything that was like prevalent like it is nowadays. It wasn't talked about. I had nobody. What about you?
I had nobody. I grew up in a very conservative family. We went to church. We went to Catholic church every Sunday. I went to catechism. And for me, it was not just spirit, but it was angels too. So we'd be in catechism and there'd be an angel in the corner of the room talking to me. And I'm looking and they're like, you need to pay attention. The nuns are like, pay attention up here. And I'm like, there's an angel. They didn't want to hear that. And things like seeing spirit walking through the house, and I'd wave hello. And my parents are always like, you have the most incredible imagination. You have the biggest imagination. And no, well, yeah, I do. I do have a great imagination, but that was not imagination. So it was hard because nobody in my family wanted to hear that. They would be like, oh, that's cute. You've got a great imagination. Or
a little friend.
Don't scare your little sister, things like that. So when I visited my grandma, my Irish grandmother, my mom's mom, who was Southern Baptist, by the way. So this is pretty amazing, very devout woman, but she would hear me and she told me she had some similar experiences. And my mom can't accept that because she only knows her mom as the Southern Baptist mom. She didn't have that relationship, but it was helpful because at least she would listen to me and she would believe me and we could talk about these things. And I just adored her. That's one of the reasons I adored her. Hi, Grandma. But other than that, no. And so, Terri-Ann, did you ever find it frightening as a child?
Very much so. And, just to clarify, not all spirits are good. Mm-hmm. So I had some negative experiences when I was a child, and I would have like reoccurring dreams. As a child, I remember having horrible reoccurring nightmares, and they would reoccur. And there was nobody really understood anything about that time about nightmares or anything like that. So I wasn't fully aware. And I think because of that, that was one of the reasons I totally shut it down. I didn't want anything to do with it at that time. Even as like going into a teenager, I really felt like, and going into the psychic part of it, but I really felt like I would make those bad things happen. Like I would have a premonition about something, it would happen. Of course it would be bad. And so I felt like I was always making those things happen, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, even just like thinking about mediumship ability as a child, so many memories come back to me. I actually was triggered. The first time I saw The Sixth Sense, I was shaking because I had flashbacks. And it wasn't exactly like in the movie, but remember when the little boy needs to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and he's like looking down the hallway and then he runs as fast as he can. I did that. If I had to get up in the middle of the night, I was terrified and I would just run as fast as I could. We lived in this old 3-story house and it was haunted to the max. Mm-hmm. And I would just rush and slam the door and they'd still come through the door, or they'd scratch on it, or I'd see feet at the bottom of the door. But the worst thing was my parents brought home this antique armoire, and it's huge. It was huge. We don't have that anymore. And on the 3rd floor for a while, they put all of us girls up there. The 3 older girls were up there, and we had like an apartment upstairs by ourselves, but there was no closet. That's how old the house was. So Dad's like, oh, we'll get this armoire. You can keep your clothes in it. Fantastic. Seems so innocent, right? The middle of the night. Now remember, my family calls me Sherry. Most of my family calls me Sherry, not Ivory. So in the middle of the night, I hear this creak and I hear Sherry, Sherry. And I went just cold, and I heard it again. And I remember just putting the covers over my head and shaking, and I'd hear footsteps coming over by the bed, and something would like poke me and like try pulling the blanket. My other sisters never woke up, which is pretty amazing because my sister Ruth was an incredible psychic medium before she shut all this down. So, but maybe she was just so young or slept better than I did. But every single night, and it had a skeleton key. I would take the skeleton key and lock that armoire, put the skeleton key in one of the bottom drawers. And every night I'd hear creak, Sherry. Oh, I hated it. So that's where I stopped sleeping. I was 10. That's when I stopped sleeping. I would stay up till I passed out because I was terrified. I didn't want to go to sleep because I was scared what was going to happen. And so that was childhood. And I really did not sleep well again until my 30s.
I always slept with a light on. And every once in a while, it depends on where I am. I still might. It really depends on what's going on, what kind of place I'm in. I am very sensitive, even to like old places, historical places. I really have to like put this big shield around myself and like be like, okay, this is what's going on, and nobody can touch me, nobody can come in my field, and I'm very cognizant of that now.
That reminds me, my parents had remodeled this Victorian house in Alabama. And diagonally across the street was a really cool Victorian house that was getting ready to be remodeled. Dad said, we have permission to go over. My family's really into houses and building. Let's go look at that house. Great. I'm excited. We go inside, and I got about halfway up the first flight of stairs to the 2nd floor. And I felt that sick feeling like when there's something evil there. Mm-hmm. And I felt a presence come next to me, and it didn't feel good at all. And I just, you knew it was something evil. I turned around and I had a kitten in my hand. So I turned around and marched down those stairs outside and stood at the street. And my dad's like, come on, you're missing the best part. I advise you to get out of that house. Get out of that house right now. And they're like, what's wrong with you? And that was in my 30s. So, as a child, it's just really scary because if you don't have somebody in your life to say you're seeing spirit, it's okay. It's just spirit. They're just trying to get your attention. They want something from you. That part of the 6th sense, I think, was right on to teach kids young that they want something from you and they're not going to hurt you as a rule. And so they won't be so scared.
Right. I remember even my daughter. So I was becoming aware by then. So my daughter would be in her bedroom. Maybe she was like 3 or 4, and she'd be playing like you, talking to somebody. And clearly I could see a little boy, and I'd say, what's his name? And she would tell me his name. And this is what he said. And I'm like, okay, but she wasn't afraid or anything. So I felt I did put a big protection around her anyway, just because if she's open to that, I just didn't want anything else being able to come in. But being as a mom looking at it, it was cute. Like I was like amazed at her ability to just be free with it. Does that make sense?
It does. And, my daughter's a psychic medium. She doesn't do it for a living, but as a child, similar things. We were living in a house in Prescott, Arizona. And every night I would hear footsteps. We were the only two living there. Nobody else had a key. I would hear footsteps going down the hallway towards my bedroom. And then there'd be these big flashes of light, which were just like the angelic light, just poof, but I'd see the footsteps I'd hear down the hall. It didn't feel good. And the next day, some of those nights, my daughter would say, the lady came to visit me last night. I'm like, what lady? The lady with the dog. She has this pretty yellow gown and she has a dog and she drew it for me and it was a greyhound. And that dog and the lady would come visit her. And I'm sure it was to protect her against whatever that thing was walking down the hallway. But as a mother who knew that spirits exist, that they are not always good things, I was terrified. There were times I made her sleep in my room because I wanted to be able to protect her as much as I could. And actually the hypervigilance, not wanting my daughter to go through what I did, is why I was hypervigilant into adulthood, where I wouldn't go to sleep, as well as spirits bothering me.
Yeah.
So what was the point where you realized what's going on and you were ready to do something, not necessarily do something professional, but just admit you have it, embrace it?
Oh, it was late. I always had it intermittently. It was like 40 because, before that I had no interest in any of it. I was living my life. My sons were, young. So I had a full life. I really didn't have any time. And then when it started happening more and more, I started to meditate and my gifts began to awaken again. And I was like, okay, well, I have got to do something about this because I didn't want that old stuff coming back with all of that. And we had lived in a house in Santana, Arizona. And that house had just a dark presence. I hadn't really noticed it when we moved in, but by the time we moved out, I felt the darkness in that house. And that was one of the times also, like you, I had my daughter sleeping with me a lot. So I did a lot of research by then, and I was looking for how to, have protection around yourself, how to set your boundaries very clear with them. They cannot touch you. They cannot come into your space. And that seemed to help. But once I was out of there, just heaviness, like I feel a lot. So the heaviness that I felt in that house, and that's the house, obviously, that I was with my ex-husband and we ended up divorcing in it as well.
It can really affect a relationship to be in a home with a dense or toxic, dark presence, for sure. It makes things more difficult. I'm thinking back to in my 30s, I was working at a radio station and the news reporter was my dear friend. And I had told her about the things happening at my house. And it was a house my brother had built and he hadn't sold it. We were living in that house till he could sell it so it wouldn't just be empty. So it's a brand new home. Never been a home there before to our knowledge. Doesn't matter. So there were spirits coming in, walking through rooms, interesting lights flashing and sparkling around. And she wanted to see it. She was Catholic, but she really wanted to see it. So she spent the night at my house and she was so terrified. She never spoke to me again. Like our friendship, I lost my best friend. Wow. Because she saw what was she experienced what she could of what was going on. And that was way too much for her. And it really just like threw her for a loop for how she was raised. If you go from never experiencing anything to being in a house where it's a free for all, it is sort of like, it reminds me of another movie, Poltergeist, where those investigators are like, one time we got on film, a little toy car moved 6 inches over the course of 12 hours. And the father opens the door and there's toys whirling around. It was kind of like that for her. It wasn't that dramatic, but too much for her.
Right.
I can't remember a night that I didn't have spirits wiggling my toes while I'm watching TV or trying to sleep or waking me up, poking me. or playing with my hair, or sometimes it's nice things like, they're stroking, but it still wakes me up, or their hand while I was at my mom and dad's house last week, helping my mom. Every night I felt a firm, gentle hand on my upper back. And I think it was my Uncle Albert, because that was like my mom's father in his picture. One of the last pictures taken of him was right next to the guest bed. So I was seeing that every night and thinking about how much I miss him. And I'd feel that gentle hand there. So sometimes it's nice like that. And sometimes it's like bouncing as hard as they can on the side of the bed, like a person turning around and just plopping their fanny on the mattress as hard as they can a few times. And so you're bouncing, and, that's just a great way to wake up. And I finally did learn from one of my mentors, and that was Belinda Howe back in the 90s. She's like, Ivory, I'm sorry, my bangs are driving me insane today. She's like, Ivory, set boundaries with this. Tell them they're not allowed to be in your bedroom at night. And if they want to talk to you, you'll give them time during the day when you're at your office, when you put time aside, but not when you're in your bedroom. Most of the time that works, but I don't know about you, but there's some pushy spirits that still come through. But now I'll be like, no, I'm sleeping. I need my sleep to do my work, to stay healthy, not now. And unless it's a spirit of, and I see it's somebody I know who's recently passed, well, then I'll wake up for them. But otherwise, no, it comes back to giving too much of yourself to your own detriment.
It can be daunting. Even when my husband and I, my current husband, we built a house in Gilbert, Arizona, and so it was a brand new house. There was just land there before. There was an Indian chief, and he would stand outside of our door, and I would see him and I would feel him. And so by then I started to understand about boundaries, but he seemed to be very sensitive and caring. He just wanted to see our family. And I had got the feeling when I communicated with him, and he told me that he missed his family. And so he enjoyed viewing that, but it freaked my husband out. I mean, he was like, what are you talking about? He's like, there's somebody. I'm like, clearly there's somebody out there. You don't see that?
Nope. Nope. And there's so many times, like in my childhood, I would pray, and in my youth, I'd pray, please, God, take this away. This is scary. I don't want this. And I ran from it. And I think you just have to come to a place where you're not only ready to admit you have it and embrace it and develop it, but realize if you can help somebody with that gift, that's probably the main reason it was given to you. And then that makes sense to me. It's not just to terrorize me through my childhood and interrupt my sleep, that I can help people with this. So another thing came back to me, a really kind of a big deal. My best friend in Maryland, this was junior high, actually probably I was like 14. And my best friend's grandparents had a mansion on a river in Frederick, Maryland. And we would go there and spend the weekend, and we each had our own bedroom. And we loved to take oil lamps and light them. And we'd walk around this 4-story mansion and outside on the lawn down to the river in our nightgowns, pretending we're like at the turn of the century. And one night there's a party at this mansion. Her grandparents had a big fancy party, and there were butlers and maids serving hors d'oeuvres, and a woman died in the middle of the party. And I saw her stand up, her spirit stand up from her body, and she was really mad, and she was coming right at me. And I screamed and I fainted. And her grandmother was like, what a lot of drama. Oh my goodness, you don't need to be so dramatic about it. And how could I was stuttering, like, how could I tell them? They didn't see that. They thought I was freaked out over somebody dying. No, I'm freaked out over a very angry spirit coming at me like this. I don't know what her deal was. I didn't know these people. They were a lot of people in politics, and I was 14 years old. I was just there with my friend. And that was very traumatic for me and embarrassing, because nobody else knew what was going on. So a lot of times it's just not appropriate to share with people what you're seeing. Do you think those people would have received that well if I said, oh, no, I'm not, it's not about her dying, it's about her spirit coming at me? No. If they thought it was weird that I screamed and fainted, they would have really thought that was weird, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that reminds me of the time we were in Jerome with my husband. Oh my gosh. And so I'm so hypersensitive, and it's like he doesn't understand all the time, but we go to like these historical places, and I love to be at historical places and I find the history amazing. But if you're not careful, I find even sometimes with protection, I've gotten an attachment, and I'm all of a sudden like drained beyond belief. And we come home and I'm just like exhausted, and I have to really work hard to get that off of me. And he just can't comprehend, like, what am I speaking about? Like, you were perfectly happy here, and now you're like, your whole demeanor is like, and it's hard to explain.
It is, and it's what makes our work so hard. I want to explain something. A lot of our listeners are in other countries, and I want to take a moment to give a shout out to my large listener base out in Australia. I have a suspicion that started with my friend Wendy Zamet, who is a dear and probably told her friends because she loves this show. Thank you so much. So happy to have you all listening. But for all of you in countries outside of the US, Jerome is an old mining town. And in the 1800s, it was a Wild West town. They were mining copper. I can see that town from my living room window. That's how close it is. And it's perched on the side of a mountain. Really cool place, a very much an artist colony now where they're still mining nearby. But it is very haunted. I have seen spirits walking through the old theater. I had one sit next to me in a chair at the old theater, a man in a top hat turn and look at me and smile. I used to take my daughter to the Jerome Grand Hotel because she loved Jerome so much for her birthday. And on her 10th birthday, we were staying at the Jerome Grand Hotel, and I had my best friend, she had her best friend, and we were all in this big room with a view out over the Verde Valley, which is where I live. That would be Sedona, Cottonwood, Camp Verde. And in the middle of the night, I woke up, and there's a man standing at the foot of the bed, and he's wearing a green type gown. He had a surgeon's mask around his neck. He had a dark mustache, dark hair, handsome man. And he's just staring at me like this. And I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, everybody else is asleep. He stood there. I think he stood there about 40 minutes just staring at me, and he disappeared. And the next morning, I did tell the owner, it's a couple owners back at this point, what had happened. And he's like, oh my gosh, that used to be the recovery area for surgery. And he had showed me pictures of the surgeons they had there, and I was able to pick him out. He's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to make note of this. That's really exciting. And he's going to tell people about it. He was really into sightings. I had the stuff like that all over Jerome, hearing spirit talk to me, having weird things like spin around on like the do not disturb sign on the doors spin.
I hate when doors slam. That just freaks me out. You're in your house alone. There's nobody there, and the door slams, and you're like, what was that?
When I was a teenager, young teen, we lived in Maryland, and my dad had built a house up on this place called Oak Acres, which was on the side of Appalachian Mountains. Really nice neighborhood. No house had ever been there before to our knowledge, but again, that doesn't mean a darn thing. So I was a latchkey kid. My parents both owned businesses. I would come home first, and I was allowed to go into my parents' bedroom, which had white carpet, take my shoes off first, and watch TV in there, which I preferred because otherwise I had to go downstairs into the basement where the family room was by myself and watch TV. So I'm watching TV, and I hear people come in, like the door slam downstairs, footsteps up the stairs, footsteps across the living room and kitchen, which was a tile. And I say, hi, I'm in here. And then 5 minutes later, I realize I don't hear anything. I'm in here, nothing. I go out and look, there's nobody home, nobody there at all. Oh my gosh, that happens so often. And then my dad got this idea that to break up the sibling arguing going on, he was going to put me in a room by myself to give me my own room. He cut off part of the living room on the far side of the house from all the bedrooms. and made a bedroom for me right by the front door. And every night there'd be these weird things like triangular colored lights shining up from behind a chair in the corner of the room. And the armoire was put back in there. Yes, the same haunted armoire. Yes, and it would open. There'd be footprints around, wet footprints from the front door to my bed, just weird stuff, noises. I would watch my little TV. I'd sneak and watch it till the wee hours, watching old movies and whatever would come on just to stay awake as long as I could, because it was terrifying. And I couldn't tell them. I already knew by then they didn't want to hear those things.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what brought you to the point of doing this professionally. Mediumship specifically.
Mediumship. So once I did start my path, and I don't do it really anymore. If a spirit comes in when I'm doing healing, I allow it, and whatever messages come through, and they'll decide if I'm supposed to share it or not. But I feel like it's a beautiful gift. It really is a beautiful gift to offer. And for me, I believe you have a calling. You can't just ignore that calling. And for me, like when spirit will come in, a lot of times before a person even makes an appointment, there'll be a spirit in my house. So I know I'm supposed to see somebody, and I always say, okay, you're a little early. Let's have your person, whoever that is, make an appointment with me. And then not like a few days or so later, I'll get an appointment for a mediumship reading. So when that stuff started happening, I was like, okay, I think I need to do this part professionally, but it was still difficult, I think, to step into for me.
And I know you don't do that now. Part of it is since Anthony passed, it's just really triggering for you. And I can understand that. Plus, I know you've been called to do more healing. Though I have to say, I think mediumship is the ultimate grief therapy. So it's healing on an emotional level for most people. But I completely understand that.
Yeah, maybe one day I'll feel differently. And like I said, it's a beautiful gift. And maybe my path is meant to do more of a healing through that, do some mediumship maybe, but with more healing around what that looks like. Mm-hmm. And I've had amazing experiences with my son. He's present all the time. And I've written a book. And so I think when people start to understand what it is, and especially when you have a loved one that has crossed now and you have this connection still, it's not as scary as it is if it's just, some random spirit.
It isn't. I was just talking to somebody a little while ago this morning online about their father passed away in the last year. And I was saying, but you clearly understand that people don't really die. We don't die. We just go back to spirit, and it helps. Our human self will miss that person, but it's not the same as most people approach death and look at death, even for their loved ones. I mean, there's a big part of us that know that person goes on, that their spirit, who they really are, goes on. So I've never had a fear of death. And I really think that it's not that I'm not careful. I'm not a daredevil person, but I don't have a fear of dying because always I've known there's an afterlife. I know 100% there's an afterlife. So that doesn't bother me. One of my medium friends said to me, no, I'm not afraid of dying either. I'm afraid of pain. I'm afraid of how I'll die. I'm like, okay, I got to grant you that one. I've asked my angels, let me die in my sleep peacefully. Whenever you think you're ready to take me, let it be in my sleep peacefully. But I don't fear that. And I've had a lot of visitations from spirit who've crossed most, my personal, I've lost a lot of people at this age, friends and family who've crossed and come to me. But do you want to talk a little bit about, like, my gosh, girl, you're like the queen of dream visitations with your son. Talk about that.
So, yes. So I've just had my 32nd dream with him. And so that he's gone about 32 months from the physical, and our dreams started on the month anniversary of his death. And everyone has always been around what that date is. It doesn't exactly have to be on that date. but I'm also very aware of that it's time, so I'm open to that. And it's just been amazing because it's progressed so differently. And as he's ascended, it's changed and shifted a little most recently. So I've always seen him in body. I've always been able to hug him, hold him. And in the early days when the grief was heavy, I would leave those dreams and be hysterical waking up until I've started to work through that. And so he was showing me through that progression. And then most recently, the 30, from 30, 31, and 32 dreams, he's visited in a voicemail, a text, and the most recent one in a picture, but I did see his head peek around the corner. So he's very busy. I understand he's very busy, but it's this connection we have. And I still feel like I need that connection with him, because I understand he's very busy and doing his thing. And I don't want to take up his time, but I also want to still have that dream visitation with him.
Absolutely. And I wanted to say how unusual it is. I've never heard of anybody having this many dream visitations with one spirit as Terri-Ann's had with her son, Anthony. So usually spirit will come through once, maybe a few times. And for me, it's been mostly shortly after they passed, not later. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the things. You brought up a really good point, Terri-Ann, like that whole thing of, it's usually when I have a mediumship session booked, because for me, they book in advance. And I'll know I have one coming up the next day, and a spirit will show up here in the house. They'll either be when I'm awake or when I'm asleep. I'll see them, I'll hear them. They'll be telling me things. I'll make note of it. And if it's not a lot, I just make a mental note. But I've been driving to work from my home. I'm in the traffic, which is dense for a little town in Sedona, headed to our office. And all of a sudden, a spirit enters my body and starts controlling the steering wheel. And I'm like, oh, no, I'm not okay with this. And I'll feel it's a male, and it just feels like whatever it is, it's too big. It can't fit in my body. And I feel like I'm getting squeezed out or something. It's a horrible feeling. And I will be like, angels, take this away, take this out of me, and giving them a talking to, like, listen, you can talk to me, you can let me know things, but you cannot take over my body like that. That scares me and it's dangerous. So, I'm pulling over in a parking lot shaking. That happened quite a few times. And it's always been, I get to the office and whoever I'm seeing that day, I only do one mediumship session a day. Whoever I'm seeing for mediumship that day, inevitably that spirit was attached to them. Mm. So as a medium, like in a session, it's interesting. I was watching a show last night. I think it's called After Life After Death. And it's a young blonde guy. And some of the stuff, like the way he receives things is very much the way I receive things. Like I feel things in my body very strongly, almost immediately associated with how they died. And I'll feel it in order that it happens. So let's say somebody's in an accident. They fell. I'll feel that falling sensation. They hit their head. I'll feel a blow to the back of my head. It affected their thinking. And suddenly I'll feel kind of spacey. And then if it made them feel nauseous, I feel nauseous. Mm-hmm. If somebody got shot, I'm going to feel that sharp pain exactly where it went. If somebody had cancer, I'm going to feel where it was and how severe it was and how it progressed. So as the illness progressed through their body, I'll feel that stage by stage. That almost always happens in a mediumship reading. And in the early days with that, it would really incapacitate me. He was talking about that in a show, how it takes it out of him. Mm-hmm. As he gets older, I think it won't do that anymore because you learn to not take it on. And I asked my angels to please don't let me feel this to the full strength anymore. I don't need to feel, if somebody had a heart attack, I'd feel like I'm having a heart attack. And sometimes I'd be out of commission for a week afterwards. So now I tell people, like, I'll feel generally where it was and generally the type of pain it was. And over time, I like to ask them afterwards, can you share with me, like, how did they die? Because sometimes I feel something I've never felt before. Mm-hmm. And I said, this is going to help me with my future readings, because if you tell me what help me understand what I was feeling. For instance, I was doing a reading with a lovely couple, and they had lost a son. He came through. And I instantly felt so hot, and it was not hot in my office, but I just started sweating, and I felt like I had a high fever, and I'm like, and they didn't say anything. And so I'm like, this is so weird. I'm sorry. I don't usually, but I'm just hot all over. Find out later he died in a fire.
Mm.
And so, they didn't tell me that for maybe a month afterwards. And they're like, oh, yeah, you hit that right on the head. I'm like, why didn't you say something? So I like to ask people, how did they pass? Help me make sense, because then as you go forward as a medium, the more years you do it, you start to recognize what that feeling is. The first time that I felt Alzheimer's or anything like that, I was like, oh, that's the weirdest thing. All of a sudden, I feel like I can't think straight. Like I feel
Cloudy.
fuzzy headed. You felt that too?
Yeah, when I do mediumship for somebody that's passed and they've had Alzheimer's, that's really like you too, very strong in me. And I like that, and that changes over time. I like that, you're shown things and you can learn from that, because you could have taken that as he had a high fever, malaria, anything.
Well, they weren't saying anything. And I ask people if I hit something on the head, it's helpful to the reading for you to say that makes sense, or I understand what that is, because then spirit will give more. They'll get more into it. It'll improve the flow. But they're such a lovely couple. They were not difficult to read or anything like that. They just didn't say anything. But I honestly thought it was me. I thought I was getting sick. I thought, oh no, it's COVID again. It's like, honestly, I didn't know. So we all come across things we haven't felt before, and that's kind of hard to sort out. But something that happens to me now, it really happened a bunch in the week I was in Texas with my parents recently. I was trying really hard to be on their sleep schedule. Terri-Ann's going to laugh because she knows my normal sleep schedule. I was going to sleep at 9:30 and waking up at 5 a.m. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So if I woke up super early, my parents weren't even awake yet. And I'm trying to make myself go back to sleep. And Dad said, how did you sleep? I'm like, not good. I couldn't go. He says, couldn't you go back to sleep? I said, no, it's just a bunch of spirits coming in and bothering me. And what'll happen if I try to make myself go back to sleep, I get into that like twilight zone. And all of a sudden there'll be like the sea of faces around me that'll come in close. And sometimes they're deformed or burned or, scarred. And they're not trying to scare me. They just want my attention. But there's like all these, children, adults, young, old people wearing all kinds of different clothing, walking around, moving around me, coming in really close. So it's like suddenly I've gone into this zone where there's thousand spirits walking around. And what it really is I'm in a zone where I'm super tuned into it. I'm just open in general. And it's like a light bulb going on in a dark room. And there are the moths. Here they come. So that can be disturbing sometimes.
A lot. I don't know about you, but sometimes, I'm very grateful for all of my gifts, but sometimes I would just really like to have a normal life. I would like to go on vacation and not be disturbed. It's not like you have a 9-to-5 job and, you leave your job and you go on vacation and your phone's off and everything's fine. It's not like that at all. And so sometimes I just say, I would just like to have a normal life.
Well, I did not choose this. I did not choose to do this work professionally. My angels are like, listen, you can't run anymore. I was running the mental health program for this county and very happy. I had the best mental health job I had ever had. I loved it, loved everything about that job. And they're like, nope, now you have to move to Sedona, which is over the mountain range. You're going to start a business there. You're going to do your work using your name, your face. And that terrified me, just terrified me. But you either listen to your angels, you either value their guidance, or you don't. They were so adamant. I just knew I had to do it.
Yeah.
And I met Roz really quickly.
See?
Yeah. So I know. It wasn't even a year later that we started Sedona Soul Sisters, and the rest is history. Then you were brought to us pretty early on too. So
yeah,
it's been lovely.
It's been an amazing ride, I have to say. It's a calling. You can't really walk away from it, I've found, for me personally, because it'll just keep coming up and coming up and coming up until you step into that arena. And then you have to learn how to navigate that arena. You know, these are things that, yes, we may have gifts and know how to do that, but navigating all that, that's a learning process.
It is, and it affects your life. I mean, if I ever find another romantic partner, he's going to have to be a very remarkable person, because he's going to have to accept my gifts and what it's like for me, because I'm going to do this work until I die. All the things I do until I can't do it anymore.
And I think until you experience something, it's really hard for you to understand it. Like my husband had to experience, after my son passed, his own experiences, for him to be able then to say, okay, well, there is something to this. It's not just her telling me now, he's touching me on the head, or I felt something, you know, so it's his own experiences. So I find that too, once people have their own experiences, they start to expand more.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I try so hard. I feel like the mediumship session is every bit as much as helping them try to experience something for themselves, whether it's their touch of their loved one, which I like to do, or feeling their energy, or something evidential that comes up, whatever it may be. But often it's them, the spirit telling me specifics. So I'll go to extended family member, my brother's mother-in-law, who lost a daughter a few years ago, and asked me to do mediumship for the family. And I did a mediumship session in Flagstaff for about 25 people all at once. And, you know, I don't like doing group mediumship. And I was really nervous about that. And they were all just totally distraught, because she was, you know, not old. She was in her 40s and just so well loved, of course. And so several things came through. But one thing that was really important for the mother was, the daughter said something about a lamp, and she showed me it's the spinning of a lampshade. And I'm like, interesting. Have you seen that? She's like, no. And then she went home. She tells me later, she got back to her own home, and it was quiet. And she said, Lori, I feel Lori's spirit coming in as I say this. Hi, Lori, I miss you too. Lori, if you're here with me, make the lampshade spin. And immediately it started spinning. And she said, stop the spinning. And it stopped. That went on and on, like night after night after night. And it helped her start to heal. That was the thing that really, like she told me, it made all the difference, because she knew her daughter was on the other side. Her daughter's spirit was fine. She was in communication with her, and it helped her start to heal. So that is what keeps me doing it. I've stopped doing mediumship professionally 3 times, because it's very hard on me physically. Sometimes I get sick, like if it's about a child or a real tough situation, like somebody was murdered. It's really hard on my body. And it's been shown that on average, a professional medium will lose 10 years of their life doing mediumship for a living. That's how hard it is on your body. Yeah. So it's tough, but also I felt like I wasn't sure that was the thing for me. Like, maybe I'm not supposed to do this. Maybe that's God's way of saying, this isn't right for you. And I'd stop doing it. And then I'd be bombarded with these parents who'd lost children. And the angels and God know I can't turn away a parent. I can't do it. I cannot not help a parent who's lost a child. I don't have it in me. So it'll get me back into it, or somebody will come back to me and say, I want to tell you how that session changed my life and healed my heart, the difference it made. Like every time I try to give it up, you've experienced that too. Like somebody will come, and it's like God sends them to us and says, let me remind you why you need to do this work. Let me remind you why we gave you this mission, why you need to push through and do it anyway. And that's why here I am doing it again. And, you know, I think what's hard about it is people's expectations are unrealistic a lot, because if they watch those TV shows, they're seeing the best parts of an episode. They're seeing the highlights. And so they think that the whole reading's going to be highlights. The whole reading's going to be these amazing moments like that. And sometimes it is. And often it's things that Spirit says in a lot of readings, because Spirit has kind of what they want to say isn't always what you are hoping to hear. Like they're going to tell you, I'm fine. I'm fine. Don't grieve for me. Or they're going to say how much they love you. That's what they want you to know. And you're hoping to hear, oh, are you still mad at your sister Ethel? It's like, they're not worried about those things on the other side. So there are some repetitive messages and readings. And I think that wears me down sometimes when people can't let go of their expectations. And so they're not receiving the loving messages from spirit because they're too worried about what they didn't hear.
Yeah. It's a fine line, I find. And going back to the parents, that's why it's just too intense for me. I mean, imagine you're a mother, it's very hard to take yourself out of that situation. And then I've lost a child. So I fully comprehend what they're feeling. I understand that. And I think that's part of what I'm supposed to do with the healing, is help them get to that point. But we've talked about this several times. Mediumship is changing. It's going more into, people are becoming more awake. Their frequency is raising. They're going to be able to, and they do connect already. They've been, everybody, I'd say like 90% of my clients have had some sort of experience. Maybe they didn't understand it, but like if you've had a cool breeze on your neck, sometimes that's how they'll show me they're here, and you'll feel this cool breeze. There's no breeze in the room. There's no fan going on, but there's this cool breeze. And she might say, like if it was a husband and wife, oh yes, he always stood behind me. And so she could feel that, but she didn't understand what that was.
Yeah. And sometimes that's very, very normal not to connect with every message. And people are generally emotional and anxious when they come in for a reading. And that makes it harder for them to really connect with messages, which is why I have them record their session so they can listen to it later. I don't want to forget to give you this opportunity, Terri-Ann. Would you please show your book and tell people how to find it? Do you have it, or you can just tell the name of it?
Again, and
that's okay.
Next to you next time. It's From Death to Life: The Incredible True Story of Anthony Joseph.
If I'd been on the ball, I have it in my bedroom. I could have grabbed it. And I have a book called Let Your Angels Lead. Also, it's on Amazon, about connecting to your angels to get full guidance. So you'll learn how to feel, see, and hear your angels. And I want to take a moment to just thank you for being with us today. If you have questions at any time, send it to me via email. It's in the show description. Next week, the topic is the dangers of going rogue. That is about what happens when you decide to ignore what your angels are telling you to do. And I'm going to let you know what can happen and has happened to me and other people, and try to convince you not to do that. So we're going to be talking about that next week. And in the meantime, may your angels surround you. May your angels protect you every day, every moment of your life. I'll see you next Sunday.